welcome back to the shop. I'm Jason. Today we are jumping back into Project Black Pearl with everything else going on in the shop. I have been really waiting to do this next upgrade. I've got a whole bunch of stuff scheduled for the future, but really what I'm focusing on right now is making the interior just like I want it. Now, one of the things about this car that is interesting is while it was a fairly well spec'd out car, the radio itself is the regular BM53 radio. It is not the 16x9 nav. And what I really want, and I've been really enjoying in a couple of other products that I've been using lately, is wireless CarPlay. So let me show you what I've got going on now. I'll tell you what we're gonna do, which I guess you already know based on the title. So as you can see, I've got the regular business CD and board monitor here, the old school radio.
Wow, that's cool.
At some point, somebody pulled this guy out and they hardwired an aux input and a USB cable into it, which has been really nice for adding in, different music than what I can get on the radio. But really, if I had wireless CarPlay, I could take my phone mount out. I wouldn't have to have the apps there. I'd have it all right here in front of me. And the way that we're gonna do that is we're gonna be installing the Eonon A12S, which is gonna give me everything and more. And then in the future, when somebody else buys this car, it even has Android Auto and Aircast and AirPlay, all of those features. So the first thing we gotta do is take a look at the parts that we have in store, and I'll show you exactly how we're gonna take this from old and outdated to that. So now in full disclosure, I reached out to Eonon since I was already using some of their other stuff, and I said, hey, do you guys have an A12 available that you'd wanna send me to give a try? And as it were, they eventually did. It took a little while, but now I've got it laid out on the bench here. I've got my new screen, which you can see is very shallow and gives a lot of room in the back for activities. And it comes with all of these different harnesses. Up front, it is kind of overwhelming to think about everything that's going on here. But when you really break it down, let me show you just how easy it is. On the back side here, we've got connections for our antennas and our GPS. The 4G antennas are plus and minus for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. All of our auxiliary connectors, our main harness connector, and in the middle here, HDMI. Inside of that, we've got our GPS, our Wi-Fi and our Bluetooth, and then our two primary harness connectors with everything labeled very clearly. You can see brake, amp control, mic. There's another amp control to the other side. These two connect together. We've got our backup harness. We've got an auxiliary harness for our CAN bus. That's this little guy, the CAN bus connector. We even have the option for 4G LTE with a SIM card here. The installation should be pretty easy.
But I've been wrong before.
It really just breaks down to these two little brackets once we get the factory bracket out of the car, which shouldn't take very long. So let's get into the car and get that stuff out. To get our radio out is actually pretty simple. On the bottom of the board monitor here, your volume knob should pull off, and behind the volume knob is a T10 Torx that actually locks it into place. Now mine, somebody glued the volume knob off in the previous ownership experience, so it can just pull right out. But you can see right here, this is actually where it locks into place. When you put the screw in, this will pop out. We're gonna pop our harness off. And then our CD player has two little holes, one here and one over here. Those are T10s. You can just barely see it inside there. We need to release both of those all the way out, and it will release the catch on both sides to slide this out. With those loose, you can get your fingers back there and pop this guy out. This has got our main radio harness on it there. And then you can see right here where somebody wired that aux connector in, which is gonna be a little bit of work for me. I'll pull the IHKA out to get down there and get to the other side of it. Then our antenna connection is on that side. There we go. These clips sure do like to hold in tight. It looks like my lower housing on my cluster bezel is broken back here. Somebody put a washer on there to try to hold it in place. That didn't work. So same thing on this side. The reason we want to take these wood trims off of both sides is because we're going to lower down this section of our lower dash. That way we can open the dash to get our whole bracket out of place. Yeah, that's what this is, the big bracket. So on the driver's side, we need to get the screws out of our lower kick panel here. Give ourselves a little bit of room. That washer isn't supposed to be there. That will give us just a little bit of room to be able to pry this guy and be able to pry this guy. We'll pop out all these screws. You don't need to put a ton of torque on these. We're gonna need just a bit of room to wiggle on this side. So now we gotta get all those screws out. Before I pulled the bracket out, I wanted to go ahead and test the unit to make sure everything was working. Got everything plugged in here. I even plugged in the camera, even though I'm not gonna be running it, to check all the inputs. Now the only thing that we found in this process was that even with the CAN bus decoder in here, it still wants to see the mid. So in talking to Eonon, they said that we could run this cable over into the glove box. So we pulled the glove box down and we're gonna do that. So now we'll just get it unplugged, finish getting this bracket out, and we can complete our install. So with this out of the way, here's our connectors on the back. We have our primary harness on the right. This harness here does need to go in because it has the amp control. That's this wire to turn on the amp. Even with the CAN bus module, that's this CAN bus line too. That's a bridge line there, and then this is our backup line. So you'd hook up your backup camera here, and then on this side, you'd hook up to the front camera where it says front camera there. We were even testing our GPS antenna and our 4G antennas because we were doing Wi-Fi updates via my router to this unit. Obviously didn't need the GPS for that, but the other antennas made sense. On our dash bracket, we've got 4 Phillips. You can see this one here, one hidden back here behind my finger, likewise here and here. So using a 90-degree drill adapter is going to be our best friend here. Work to not drop those in the back of the dash. We're going to be reusing these screws to mount our brackets for the new head unit.
Yeah.
Yep, just yank. So for that, we need to get more screws out of the dash here. Got one more screw in the corner. In an instance like this, if it's hard to pull, maybe check for more screws. This will loosen it up considerably. Oh yeah.
Nice.
So the bracket does go out on both sides, and it's going to take a bit of finagling to get it. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this the rest of the way down. This side of the dash runs all the way over to the other side, and it's being held in place here on the bottom just a little bit. So if I get this side out, it'll give me a lot more space. There we go. Should I just leave the gong disconnected?
Will it not be able to make the sound?
No sound if you leave it disconnected.
Oh, you should leave it disconnected.
Here is that sucker right there.
Just connect it. Those are clips.
Yeah. And then there's styrofoam back here.
That sound is terrible.
Yeah, this is actually impact absorption. So in an accident, your knees don't go through the dash into hard parts. Now, look at how much this can move.
Oh my gosh.
That's
Take the whole bracket out just like
That's the way to do it. You got to take all these parts off.
so that you have to buy new parts.
Oh no, so that you have adequate access. That's the important part. Now I can also vacuum under here, and it's kind of gross.
Faster than I thought.
Really careful. There we go.
Nice.
Because we took, there we go. There we go. We took those screws out of the side of the dash over here, which meant this whole thing can come out. There's really only 2 more screws on that side, and you could take the whole thing. But now everything is reversible versus originally I was thinking of just cutting this out. I'm glad I didn't. And then we'll get more length out of it so that it'll fit all the way over there in the glove box. I'm going to be running the dual USB harness into the glove box, and I'm going to follow the same path that I'm taking with the mid. All I had to do was pull a little bit of the tape off of the outside of the harness, and it looks to me like we have enough room there. So we're just going to pop these wires out right here.
Yep, I can see it.
Where they're not going to get in the way of any of our adjustment motors. You got those? Go ahead and gently pull them through. There's the other one. Our microphone, we've got clipped up to the A-pillar here in the corner. Just pop the trim seal out, and we'll run this all the way down behind the seal, and then we'll come back under the dash here, and we're gonna wrap around and underneath. Yeah, it's a tight fit, but there we go. Now, all we have to do is fish the rest of the harness across the top side of the column and into the back of the dash here. Out of the way, done. If you were gonna run your camera to the front or the back, I'd suggest this route either way, and then follow your sill plate all the way back. There are main trunk harnesses that run underneath the carpet that'll get you back there pretty easily. Versus trying to go over the headliner, that doesn't make as much sense unless you're gonna mount the camera in the rear glass, which is a total possibility, being that I don't think there are any great locations to mount on the back of an E39, but that's really up to you. The rear glass is a good option, except I've got 5% window tint on here. You wouldn't be able to see squat. So after a quick side quest, we installed our M dead panel over here, or dead pedal. Really happy about that. Before you go installing anything in the dash, try to put this side together first, because having it loose makes it much easier to get the styrofoam back in. To mount our brackets, they've got vertical adjustments here, and then we're going to be using the factory little black screws, and then they just go right into the same slots as they did before. And then we'll try to get our fitment lined up and get everything adjusted. I'm going with the bottom one in the front screw hole, and we'll see what the angle looks like with it like that. And in order to mount, you're going to pull these 2 little trim pieces off of the corner to be able to get back there to our screws. So as I'm test fitting this, I'm going to do it without the harnesses so that I have more room to wiggle around. Okay, so we've got our bracket in. I'm going to do a first test fit. And let's see, I've got the top screw hole lined up there and screw hole lined up there. And I don't think I'm okay with that.
Nope, that's gross.
The fitment on the bracket with it adjusted all the way down is way too high. If I had it down about right there, it needs a little gap right there to be centered on the top. It's a tiny gap. That would be okay. So we have 2 choices. We can drill a new hole and try to tap it, or we can try to augment the brackets to slide down further. I think we'll get more flexibility by augmenting the brackets to slide versus trying to perfectly line up a hole and drill and tap. So let's do that. Definitely taller than it was by a little bit and a little crooked. So after a whole bunch of fiddling with our brackets, I managed to grind out just enough to get the brackets to sit lower and further forward, and I can get a pretty decent fitment on where the unit is sitting. The screws to install on the unit, they are fiddly and tedious and are going to take you forever to get in there. So just put your patience hat on for that. I'm going to install my 4G antennas on the left and on the right behind the airbox on top of my dash support. You really don't want metal in front of these, and this is all going to be leather and plastic and dash material foam. The metal is all supporting down below it, so we'll still have a good amount of signal there. All right, after a bunch of test fitting, getting all my wires hooked up, getting everything zip tied in the back there, for you neat freaks out there, myself included, this next part is going to make you throw up in your mouth just a little bit. But let me remind you, the outcome is well worth it. We just tested out the radio and the CarPlay and all that stuff. Man, am I excited for that. So you could try to tidy this up back here, but I'm not sure exactly what you'd do with it. You could zip tie some of the extra 4G wiring and everything. But yeah, I'm just gonna shoot, roll it. You do want to make sure that you have your amp wire plugged in. That's to help turn on the amp, even though I've got the mid in the glove box. And then without any bracketry or any CD players or anything like that, this is all just gonna slip right in. And look, what wires? They're hidden back there. So now I gotta play with these fiddly screws in the corners to get this guy to line up. And I'll be right back.
So we didn't need to take it apart, but my dad needed it to be perfect. So we took it back apart and installed the backup camera.
Temporarily, just so we could show you guys how it looks and works. Like I said before, I'm not a big fan of the way that backup cameras look on the E39. There is one setup that I do kind of like. They've integrated the backup camera into the grab handle of the trunk. For now, I have the backup camera temporarily taped to the back where most people would probably put it. You can see right here off to the side of the grab handle where the camera is. Most people are going to likely wind up putting it here or across the plate. The problem with right there is then you can't really get to the grab handle very well. That's where the ones with the camera built into the grab handle pop off to the side here into this open space. So how does it all work? Well, because this has got the CAN bus integration, we don't have to wire in a backup signal or anything like that. On the back side of the radio, we connect our power to the lead to our camera signal and plug into the camera harness. Then when you go into reverse, being a manual, my car, I can go into reverse there. We're going to get our backup signal. And one of the things that you can adjust is you can have the little lines that pop up on the ground here. I didn't quite like the way they looked. Or you can also adjust whether or not the radio turns on and off when you go into reverse. We were actually kind of perplexed because we put it in reverse and the radio turned off. Well, that was weird. So you got to go into settings. We're going to go back to car here. We've changed our layout, changed to settings. Then we're going to go to the car. And then we're going to come down here to extra settings and reverse mirror or reversing X mirror. So that changes the pattern. Reversing volume. By having reversing volume on, that means we get radio when we're still in reverse. And the different attenuation levels are, you can change the volume that the radio drops down to, or if you really need to focus in reverse, you can change it to off and the radio will turn off. You can also add, and I'll go ahead and drop one of these rulers on here, the ruler back on, which doesn't appear to be adjustable. Somebody correct me in the comments down below if you figured out how to adjust yours. I haven't figured out how to adjust mine, other than the 3 different patterns that are available. One of the interesting things about the camera setup on this radio is you can access the camera without going into reverse. So if you just scroll over, let's see, where did I put camera? I was moving everything around. Oh, there we go. If you go to camera, obviously we don't have the front camera plugged in because we don't have one, but you can plug in and see the camera while driving. So like we discussed while we were putting the unit in, I did have to modify the brackets, and I wound up modifying them about 4 more times before I got the fitment where I wanted it.
Or so I thought.
Now the unit itself isn't the same size as the actual opening. So a couple of things needed to be accomplished, or needed to be done to accomplish a tighter looking fit. On the top side here, I added this really thick black felt so that you got a nice transition between the leather and the top. And then on the bottom, there's nothing to keep the unit other than the 2 screws from sliding in and out. So I added some hook loop Velcro to the bottom here, because there is a small lip on the bottom of the unit here that will catch that when you're pushing on it. So now we'll get this back in. And about right here, so you can see on the bottom I can push, but the ledge here is catching on that Velcro and it won't move. And on the top, you can see the felt in there, and from back here, it makes it a very flush and seamless fitting. Now, let me get the screws back in real quick and you'll see with it completely installed. Okay, we've got it all installed now. I will say, it was a very frustrating experience. In order to get it to sit just right, ultimately what I had to do was make my own brackets. I had some 16-aught gauge sheet metal that I bent up to fit the size, and then I drilled holes specifically for where I wanted everything to sit. You can really see that I got this to fit just right. I've got a tiny little gap on the bottom, tiny little gap on the top. The sides are equal left to right. I've got Velcro on the bottom, so when I push on it, it doesn't move because there are only the 2 mounts and the top 2 corners. So this bottom half would kind of swing a little with the mounts that it came with. I opened up the mount holes and adjustments and moved them all over the place, and ultimately I couldn't get it to sit the way I wanted. You might be able to, you might be totally happy with the way it sits with the holes from the factory. I was not. So bear that in mind as you're making your purchasing decisions. But you can see, man, does it look good. And I've got all the functionality that I wanted out of this guy. I've got Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. I can connect to the internet and watch my YouTube videos on the road because that's really important. Not really, but it's there. We've got the backup camera as I was showing you. The only issue with not running a backup camera is when you go into reverse, it goes to a blank screen because I didn't have the backup camera hooked up. So bear that in mind. I don't see a way to turn that off in the system, but it is what it is. I'm not terribly worried about that given all the other functionality that I got out of it. It is really easy to use once you play with it for a little while. The sound quality, I'm not going to try to play music for you through the internet, through my microphone and your speakers, not knowing what that looks like, that and copyright. The sound is actually much better than what I was getting out of the old unit. I thought maybe I had an FM transmitter issue from my antenna or my diversity antennas in the back, because whenever I played FM on the stock radio, it just didn't sound right. It sounded hollow. On this radio, from the same signals, the FM sounds pretty good. Sounds even better when I switch over to the wireless CarPlay. Now in my glove box, I am running the mid, just like we talked about before, and I've got the 2 USB cables that I popped up over here as well. Now, the mid does take up a fair amount of space, but it's kind of funny because it looks like it was almost designed to fit perfectly in there, as you can see. So I'm confident it's going to stay in place pretty well. And I can close the glove box, get that out of the way. That was the only solution we could come up with to get my DSP amp to turn on every single time I switched sources or did anything like that. It's just a unique problem with these E39 series cars for some reason, possibly on some E38s, I'm not sure. So you can see here I've got one of the 3 different themes that you can set up. So I've got my date and time, and you can hit the radio up here. In the top corner, you've got your back button. You can close the different screens that you had open with that one. Adjust the display brightness. And one interesting thing to note, I have battery voltage turned on, but battery voltage only shows on this home screen. If I go to any one of the other screens, it just shows a battery, which is weird. But is what it is, not really worried about that. You can move all of these buttons around easily, put them anywhere you want between the different screens, And because this is Android, you can go into the app installer or the Google App Store, and you can pick all sorts of different things to install, manage, exit, play with on this unit. So far, there isn't anything that I want necessarily. I do want to get a dongle to run the Torque app. I think that that'd be really cool. You can go into your vehicle and you can see some of your oil consumption data here. Or if you go in to your control center, you can see a bunch of different information here as to how that stuff is displayed, including your OBD information. If you had PDC, aux venting, aux heating, folding mirrors, all of that different stuff. I'm really, really excited for that one button though. The Apple CarPlay, the wireless CarPlay. My wife's 2016 X5 doesn't even have CarPlay in it. I know that there are modules and kits that you can use to put it in there, but this is going to be a huge, huge bang for the buck quality improvement in using the radio in this car. Not to mention that you can add in video and subwoofers and anything else that you want as you go ahead and build out your project. So a real big thanks to Eonon for sending me this unit. This is something that was on my list, my very, very long list that is starting to empty out since the beginning. I had an aftermarket radio in my M5 and I really enjoyed it. I haven't done speakers on this car because I had a feeling that by changing out the head unit, I might get better sound quality. And this is definitely the case for me. The sound quality improved, the bass response improved, and my tonal clarity improved because the adjustment range that you have in this head unit is pretty vast. So for me, I'm really excited to say that the radio is off the table and it is all done. If you're looking for a unit for your car, this is the A12S. You can take a look at my links down below, pick one up, let Eonon know that you're happy with it and that I sent you their way. I really do appreciate you watching. Like, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you in the next one when we start installing all these boxes of parts on Project Black Pearl.
And rip the old brackets.